Join me today on Walk with History as we continue to talk about women spies during the Civil War and Rose O'Neal Greenhow in Washington, D.C. I'm Jen of Walk with History, veteran, historian, but I'm here to talk about Rose O'Neal Greenhow, a Confederate spy who lived here in Washington, D.C., and she was spying for the Confederacy during the Civil War. And it's interesting, I'm here right across the White House, Lafayette Square, and this is the Hayes Adams Hotel. This is where Rose O'Neal Greenhow lived. This is where her house was, right across from St. John's Church here. And we're on H Street and coming into the White House, the back of the White House right here. But Rose O'Neal Greenhow lived here, and she was able to entertain Washington society, and senators and military men came to see her, and that's how she was able to get secrets and get those secrets back to the Confederacy about the Civil War. Hey, so I'm here with Lisa from Historical USA YouTube channel and podcast.
Yes.
Rose Greenhow is someone that she has researched and knows a lot about.
Yeah,
so.
Rose Greenhow has such a really cool story. She's born here in Maryland, down in Port Tobacco. Her father was a big plantation owner. He ends up murdered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But I think that's going to have a huge impact on Rose.
Sure.
He dies in debt.
Yeah.
So her mother, Eliza, and she couldn't really afford to take care of all of her children. So she sent Rose and her sister to live with her mother's sister, or Rose's aunt, here in Washington, D.C. And Rose's aunt ran a boarding house. So, you know, congressmen didn't have the money to own an apartment in D.C., kind of like they do now.
Yes.
So during that time when they were in session, they would rent rooms. And so she got acquainted with a lot of the D.C. elite, a lot of the bureaucrats, and she is introduced to a Dr. Greenhow,
yes.
And the marriage goes through. But he was a bureaucrat. He worked for the State Department, and he shared classified information with Rose. And they, you know, fall into that DC elitist kind of social scene for the South. And her husband dies. He dies right before the Civil War.
Yes.
And she, you know, starts her own boarding house.
And that's where she moves here to the house behind Lisa.
Yeah.
It's not this house, but it was at this location.
And a lot of people, because they knew Rose, would stay there. She begins to start building this spy network within Washington, D.C. And she does this kind of at the instruction of Jefferson Davis.
As you can see, we're walking from where Rose Greenhow's home would have been to the White House, and how close proximity she is to the White House. Walking through Lafayette Square, and there's the statue here. It is actually of Andrew Jackson. It's not of Lafayette. You think in Lafayette Square they'd have a statue of the Marquis de Lafayette. And they do, but it's not here. It's over, there's 4 corners that have 4 statues in them. And he's one of those 4 corners. But you can see the White House right behind me. So that's how close Rose Greenhow is from the White House to her home, right where the Hayes Adams Hotel is now. So not very far. Like, what makes these female spies during the Civil War so effective is that they're just so unassuming. People don't think they're spying, right? And this is the 1860s, women still don't have the right to vote, so they're just not thinking that women are that involved or care that much. But like I've said before, when war is happening, everybody's involved. Everyone wants to do their part, and that's why you're getting women a part of the espionage and thinking they can help. And of course, they're using their ability of, you know, getting intimate with men, and then men giving their secrets, and men who are higher up in office, who are privy to those secrets and privy to the real information. So a lot of the information she got through just small talk and parties. She would say things like, oh, I see the Union troops are gathering. How many Union troops should I pray for? And people would say, it's 3,000, and she would say, oh no, it's 30,000. And that's how she would get the numbers of troops that were going. And she was able to get those numbers to people on the southern line. And that's why in the Battle of Bull Run, they were aware of how many troops were going to be there. And they were able to get forces to be a strong adversary to the Union Army. President Lincoln thought that that first battle was going to be easy, simple, done, over with. And then that's the Battle of Bull Run is where they realized the South is not going to be an easy win. But it really is a lot of that intel that they're getting to know how many people are going to be there and what's going to happen, so they can be a force to be reckoned with.
Rose began affairs with several congressmen that were staying in and out of her boarding house. And it's actually kind of through those affairs and William Seward's kind of suspicions of her and her motives that Alan Pinkerton starts to come in. Yeah. And she kind of becomes someone that he wants to kind of put under a microscope, and he starts having people follow her and staking out her house. He starts trying to, you know, finding out who she's having these affairs with, yeah, who's, you know, coming to see her kind of at the at nighttime.
So it's interesting you say Alan Pinkerton's the only one who doesn't trust her. Yeah. He's the only guy who believes she's actually capable of it.
Yes.
So in a way, Alan Pinkerton's the only one who actually is a feminist.
who actually does believe she can do, yeah, the things that she's doing.
Yeah. On August 22nd, 1861, Pinkerton cased Greenhow's house, and he's spying on her house, and he notices a young Union officer entering and standing on the shoulders of a fellow helper or fellow person who's investigating. He's looking into her window, and he spies on the front parlor and noticed the officer in Greenhow speaking in hushed tones, looking over a map of the Union fortifications. Pinkerton waited until the officer left the residence and tries to flag him down. Well, he catches some attention for doing that, and then Pinkerton's arrested. But while Pinkerton is in jail, he says, I was told to spy on her. The War Department then goes after Rose. After she's returning for a walk the next day, Rose was approached by Union soldiers and arrested with her youngest daughter, little Rose. And he's the one who eventually goes into her house, will search her home, find the old messages, find the codes, and she will eventually be arrested. And she's arrested and put into the prison here in the Capitol area. It's now where the Supreme Court stands. We will go over there and talk about it. People just aren't sure what to do with a woman in prison. This is pre-Mary Surratt. This is pre the federal government, you know, executing Mary Surratt for the assassination of the president. And it would have to be to that extent for the people to actually think then women were capable of such transgressions against the military. But they are. O'Neill Greenhow's house here to the Supreme Court building. This was the old Capitol prison.
Yeah.
This is where, after they couldn't control Miss Greenhow in her home, even under house arrest, they put her here.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of stuff did she get into while she was here?
So, you know, she was still doing the secret messaging.
Mm-hmm.
She used her curtains to
Yes.
get out messages. She used the candles to get out messages. She even used her daughter.
Because her daughter's held with her here.
Yeah,
little
and they would
Rosie.
allow her to play in the yard. She had about 50 women
Yeah.
working in her spy network.
So they could kind of come and visit.
And,
for
you know,
different reasons.
her daughter would pass stuff by, and the women would come in as nurses
Sure.
and things.
So we said
the
January
Confederacy.
18th, 1862 to May 31st, 1862. And she's released, like you said, in a prisoner exchange.
Yeah.
And she's forced to go back to Richmond, Virginia.
Yes.
So from
Yeah.
here, she goes to Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
And this Capitol Prison is famous for holding the Lincoln conspirators.
But, you know, we know that Rose, she ends up going to England.
Yes.
And the story of her coming back is also pretty
Yes.
harrowing and very tragic as well. And on an English boat, a blockade runner,
Yep.
and is pursued by the Union. And around Cape Fear, North Carolina, her boat, the ground.
Runs aground, and she takes the rowboat.
She takes the rowboat, but what else she also took was all of her earnings,
Her gold.
her gold.
Sewn into her dress.
Yes, so when the
So-
rowboat ends up capsizing,
Yes.
she's weighted down with all of her riches
Yes.
from the book that she wrote, and she unfortunately or fortunately drowns.
Succumbs.
And she's buried in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Yes. I want to thank Lisa from Historical USA for being here today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
And it was great to do this together and
It was
talk
so much
about
fun.
women in history and women leaders and women who
Yeah.
take their agency upon themselves to make a difference during
Yeah.
the war. So thank you, and on to our next Walk with History.
Yep. Bye.